Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everybody, it's William Harris here. I'm the founder and CEO of Elumynt and the host of this podcast where I feature experts in the D2C space, sharing strategies on how to scale your business and achieve your goals. And you are in for an epic treat today because I have the one, the only Kurt Elster here.
Check nasty.
Guy still needs to teach me how to use my Rodecaster Pro 2 a little bit more. Kurt is one of the most highly regarded independent consultants in his industry. He's a senior e-commerce consultant who helps Shopify merchants like Jay Leno's Garage uncover hidden profits in their websites through his e-commerce agency, Ethercycle. With over 2 million downloads now, Kurt is best known for hosting the unofficial Shopify podcast, which I've actually had the pleasure of being on. In fact, my episode about the ROAS death spiral, I don't know if you realize this as well, Kurt, it's currently the second most watched YouTube video on your podcast, second only to Harley Finkelstein, the freaking president of Shopify.
Yeah,
Kurt,
that's tough to beat.
It's truly an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much.
How's that for an introduction? Do you remember how we introduced, how we started off our episode on your show?
Yes, and it was the only, I don't have a ton where I put the full video up on YouTube. When I do, that means I was really invested. And so for yours, it was like you busted in through the door.
Yeah.
Which we 3 cameras set up. Oh my gosh, what am I running a sitcom here? and then there was an entire premise of the cake is a lie.
Yeah, the cake is a lie when it's fake, right? So yeah, and we staged the whole thing. It was fun though. So before we get into the official good stuff here, I do want to make sure that I announce our sponsor is Elumynt. Elumynt is an e-commerce agency. We focus on driving profit for e-commerce businesses. We've actually helped 13 customers get acquired. The largest one sold for $800 million. And Adweek recently ranked us as the 12th fastest growing agency in the world. So that's pretty cool.
Congrats.
But thanks, man. On to the good stuff here. I want to get into the backstory of starting Ethercycle. How do you end up with Jay Leno's Garage? 2 million downloads, over 2 million downloads. First podcast. Tell me about what led up to where you are today.
All right, so I've been engaged in e-commerce my entire adult life. I started trying to locally find Furbies in the 90s when eBay was a brand new thing. They didn't use PayPal yet. And it was selling Furbies on eBay. Retail arbitrage was a thing I started with when I was a teenager. I did that through college. And I ended up that's how I got my first proper post-college gig. I ended up being a channel manager for a dropshipper. And so I was I'm really into this e-commerce stuff. This is fabulous. This speaks to my interests. And so I then foolishly, not knowing what I didn't know, said, I'll build my own e-commerce platform. And it'll just be me and a friend who is on unemployment. And that's how we'll do it. And it turns out that's really, really hard. We were not successful. But that's where the name Ethercycle came from. Our target market was bike shops. And it was supposed to be an e-commerce platform for bike shops. So the brand name made way more sense in that context. But it didn't work, and I needed to pay the rent because I'd also jumped into an office because I thought that's what you needed to do. And so I started, we started selling WordPress sites to local businesses. I just wrote a letter introducing myself, slipped it under their doors, and we got clients that way. And I said, if it works with local businesses, what happens if I reach out to because we were in the Chicago suburbs. I said, what happens if I reach out to these big ad agencies in Chicago, these marketing firms? And it turns out a few of them said, hey, we'd be happy to outsource web development work to you. And so we were able to ratchet up that way. And then at the same time, I had a friend who owned a bike shop, the Chicago's finest recumbent bike shop, Ameling Cycle. He goes, I hate my website. It's supposed to sell online. I just want it to be easy. You know what to do. Just help. And I said, I heard of this thing. This is 2011. I said, I heard of this thing called Shopify. And I think their whole thing is they're easy. We'll just build a custom theme on that. Again, not knowing what I'm getting into.
Sure.
Only we were successful at it. And so they reached out. They said, we got this thing called the Experts Program. You should join. Oh, a deal. And then it a few years after that, I said, man, I got to get clients in here. I should start a podcast. Oh, I didn't really know what I was doing, right? I had no idea. I had a $30 microphone, a really echoey room, just awful audio quality. Didn't stop me. Just kept publishing until years later, 400, 500 episodes, suddenly you got 2 million downloads and the president of Shopify is like taking you seriously. It's quite incredible. And no one can stop you. It's self-publishing. It's great. And we get better at it over time, of course. And around that time is when I put together wait a second, why are we doing anything other than Shopify here? So those two things went together. And then we just stayed the course. You keep doing the same thing, you get better at it. And at some point, you're just last man standing.
Yeah. You know what, though? I mean, I like, there's a lot about what you just said, which one of this is just that dedication to sticking through something, anything, for the most part, almost inevitably leaves you in a better spot because everybody else ends up getting out of it at some point in time. Everybody else doesn't have the tenacity to stick with it. And I think that that's huge. You have a lot of talent, though, too. And so, that can't be looked over. But I appreciate what you said about you went into it without knowing all the reasons why you shouldn't. And I feel like that's actually one of the biggest keys for success in anything that somebody does is you can overanalyze all the reasons why you shouldn't do something. And I think that prevents a lot of people from actually just taking action and making something happen.
There's a lot of advantage in not knowing what you don't know, like just being ignorant and jumping into it because you don't realize what you're getting yourself into. Like today, I often wonder that. For years, I've wondered, man, if I knew what I knew now, would I talk myself out of it then? And it's totally plausible.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, in fact, I think it's very highly likely that you would, right? Like, I think that about a lot of the stuff that I've done that more often than not, if I would have known what I know today, I would have said, don't do it. And sometimes I have to catch myself with that where, somebody else wants to do something that maybe I've accomplished. And I look at them like, you don't want to do it. Like, there's all this, like, don't even bother. Like, it's really not worth it. But the reality is it is, and you just have to don't jade that perspective on some of those things too. And it's like, let them stay naive a little bit. They need that naivety and that excitement at that stage because it is tough. There's a lot of hard things you're going to encounter when you run a business.
Absolutely.
So WordPress was an interesting start too. This is just completely tangential for anything that's really worthwhile. But I actually sold some WordPress sites as well, long time ago. I think you got into it before I did, but my first client was my pediatrician, and I can just remember going to my client and my doctor just being like, "Hey, I feel like you need a website." And he had like music or whatever that he made. I won't say his name just because I don't know if he wants me to, but he had music that he made and everything in his own CD, like kids music. And so I was like, "I'd love to make a website for you." And so that was my first client in the WordPress space.
Did it play music?
I don't remember. It probably did.
Did the site have a soundtrack?
There's probably this was probably the MySpace days. So yeah, it probably had at least some kind of like a small music player. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and I think the thing that you and I, when we first met, do you remember when we first met in person? We'd talked, online for a long time, but the first time we met was actually in Minnesota.
I believe at a WeWork, and you said,
it was at a WeWork.
Hey, your fly's down. And you were like really, really cool and subtle about it. And I was about to go give a talk. And so I was always, since then, I've been like, that's a good dude. And I'm very grateful that he was really subtle and cool about that and saved me from talking to like 40 people with my fly open.
That's hilarious. I don't remember that part. I was going to say I remember you getting up there at the WeWork here. And I think it was Charlie Joachim over at Sezzle and Todd Frosted there. And you did a talk basically where you just tore down a bunch of people's websites, right? And you're just saying, hey, here's a bunch of ways that we can make this better. And it was so helpful for people to just see on the fly the way that your brain thinks. And it leads towards just trends and best practices in CRO in general, which I know that you've made a really big name for yourself on. And what do you see right now as some of the trends that we need to be watching, or how do you go about just approaching what's a good website?
Well, yeah, there's a few things. Like I like the squint test. If I can like really just kind of like squint at it, blur my eyes, can I still work this website or even figure out what it's about? If yes, sure. All right, that's a really good sign. Like that is my 2-second litmus test. That's great. Okay. And so a lot of that's about like, did you resist the urge to be subtle? That's like such a trap and has been so for like, since as long as design's been a thing. It's like subtle, sophisticated. So let's have 10-point gray fonts on a dark gray background. Like it's not gonna work. And then, like let's be really cagey about what it is, who we do and what we sell, because then we'll look really sophisticated and mysterious. Please don't. Absolutely
Yeah.
don't do that. If you do that, I'm just like clicking the back button and leaving and going back to scrolling through the endless gazing pool of, Instagram or TikTok or
Yep.
whatever the heck. I just just right off the bat, is this thing easy to read and is it dead obvious as to what's going on here? Because the other thing you hear
Yeah.
from merchants, nobody reads. Nobody reads. But then you go bury all the info that the person needs and not make it obvious. Maybe there's a reason they're not reading.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel like this reminds me of my early days in SaaS. So before e-commerce, I was in SaaS, and I remember at the time there were two real big websites that I appreciated for just validating or testing whether or not our site was good. There was the user is my mom and the user is drunk. Do you remember these websites? I don't know if
Drunk
they're even
user
still around.
testing
Yeah,
with Richard Littauer, I believe was the man's name.
that sounds
and
familiar. Yep.
I had him on my podcast as one of the
Nice.
earliest guests. That's how I remember the name. And I thought that was a big get at the time. I was very excited. He wasn't kidding. You would pay him. He would get drunk on whiskey and then test a series of websites. And he was like, I don't know how sustainable this is. You and me both, buddy.
No, I know, but the reality is it's the kind of the idea of the squint test that you're talking about, where it's like, all right, let's see if you can see what this is, saying when you're squinting, if you can tell what's going on while you're drunk, or if your mom can tell what's going on this website, those are good signs that you've got a website that's clear enough.
The user is a crazy, lazy drunk. Assume that they're a narcissist. If your website's just talking about you, all right, that's not going to interest me as a narcissist. So you got to make it, the whole website should be you focused language. And if I'm bleary-eyed drunk, can I still navigate this thing? Right. And
Sure.
if there can't be road bumps. I'm lazy. It can't make me work to try and get to the outcome that you're trying to push on me, which is buy something. Right. And so if you can pass those 3 sniff tests, all right, you're in pretty good shape. Now, when I think about all of this, I'm thinking about it entirely in the context of mobile. I think as web professionals, we all spend a lot of time on desktop, but our users don't, especially in e-commerce. If you told me your website was 75% mobile, that would be low. 80 to 90 is much more typical.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the things that's interesting is I remember when this shifted significantly, over the last few years to where mobile was truly mobile first, and Google started evaluating even the effectiveness of your website accordingly. But you're right, as professionals, we use our desktop extensively, and not just one monitor, but we've got several monitors. I've got, a couple extra monitors right here. They're big, and so I can see everything that I want and in full detail. And that's not the reality that most people are experiencing on your website. And so, to your point, it's you should be able to see what this is very clearly on mobile. Don't bury it. Make it easy to read. What else? I mean, these are your best practices, but how do you feel about best practices in general?
I like best practices, but I also take it with a grain of salt.
Sure.
Essentially, when we talk about best practices, it's really well, what does Baymard say we should do? Baymard Usability Institute is a fabulous resource. I love them. But their approach is, it'll be oh, hey, we looked at 2,000 websites. We did user testing across 200 of them. And so it very much becomes well, we're pushing toward the average, right? And so there are always going to be exceptions and edge cases and perfectly legitimate reasons to not do things exactly the way Baymard told us, or situations where it just isn't practical to engage in those best practices. I think the risk that we've gotten into is a lot of people, you could just say, well, Baymard says it's best practice. And then that's the end of the discussion. There's no more argument. It is what it is. What you should be looking at is okay, well, that means that's a good starting point. That means that's a safe place to begin. And then maybe we test that later. Trust but verify, I think, is the way we should approach best practices. But at the same time, if your website, if you don't have a huge quantity of traffic, it could be difficult to split test things. And certainly you can only split test one thing at a time if you've got, if you don't have enough traffic. And so it's not always practical to verify these things. But I think the one thing everybody could do is screen recordings. Oh my gosh, Microsoft Clarity is free. Install that on your site. You could view screen recordings of people actually using the site. And the way I do it now is all right, show me only mobile, show me only rage clicks. Wait, hold on. I got an effect for it. Hold on, I can do this better. Sure. I want the person who's on their website
like, no, I can't figure this out.
and they just start clicking like 25 times, and then it'll flag that. And you can watch like a recording of the person losing their mind, just like mashing on this color button that doesn't work on one device, but no one ever noticed because that person's not going to complain. Then they're not going to buy. They're just going to quit the site. You're never going to hear from them again. But Microsoft Clarity saw them. It was spying on them. It watched it. And so you watch, I'll sit for like 30 minutes, an hour, and I'll watch those at 1.5x speed, move through it quickly. And I'll have, it'll skip inactivity. So if they stop, it just moves past it. And, doing that, you could watch a few dozen of these and very quickly you'll recognize where like, oh, there's an issue here. Like I was working on this huge apparel site and we discovered it took too long for the color variant switcher to work. And so people would rage click on that. And there was no breadcrumbs that would let you go for product collection. And so that was frustrating for folks. And you couldn't actually zoom the image on mobile, but it didn't stop them from trying in a very angry fashion. And so like if you can uncover those issues and then address them, the whole thing performs better. But unless you're looking for them, I promise you're never going to hear about it. You're never going to notice.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really good. I got to go back here real quick too. For those of you who are only listening and not watching the video, Kurt perfectly lip synced that random complaint. That was pretty impressive. But so, the idea here of like you said, with Baymart and some of these best practices, it's the idea of like, don't reinvent the wheel. Circle is probably a really good safe shape to start with if you're making a wheel. You can play around with other shapes then after that, right? Test some stuff, but it's like, hey, circle's probably been proven. Go and start there. There are some best practices that are worth starting at, and then recording things and seeing where people are getting blocked and work on that. And I think that's just brilliant advice because there are edge cases, like you said. Everybody does use things a little bit differently. And so if you take just the average of every single person, that's fine. But what about your specific users? Your users, you might, tend towards a very specific, group or demo or whatever, and they react a little bit differently. And let's just even say for extreme examples, it's like how my mom would use a website versus how my daughter would use a website. They likely have very different ways that they're going to approach this. And you can start with a general best practice, but then if I'm over indexing towards one or the other, I need to look at, well, what is my particular demo? How do they interact and where are they getting stumped or tricked, and work on that.
100%. Yeah. Well, and I think the other risk with best practices is you go, where's the line, right? If you start listening to, well, this is every best practice. So does that become a to-do list, right? Should I implement every single thing that's suggested? Absolutely not, right? I think less is more. When you can eliminate elements that people don't interact with, and that's where heat maps are very useful, where you can see like, okay, no one is actually using this element. Then you can get rid of it. If I can get rid of it, it simplifies the site. That makes it easier to use. It makes it more likely to figure out what's the next step. Every page should have like one primary thing it's trying to get me to do.
And only one primary thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. When I say primary, I mean one. I know you can't have like 10 goals, buddy.
Right.
Like you get one. And the moment you add a secondary goal, all you've done is dilute the first one.
Right.
It's like with sliders, like a carousel slider with 5 images in it. Oh, my website's slow and my conversion rates are down. Well, maybe we shouldn't be loading like 10 1 megabyte JPEGs in a slider when 9 out of 10 people only ever see that first one.
Right.
But sliders settle debates because now, as a business owner, I don't have to make a decision, right? I can just jam all my content in there. I hate sliders, is my point.
Well, there's something about not making a decision that makes us feel good, which is really funny. But you're right. A lot of people are just like, hey, let's just appease everybody. And that almost kind of leads into, let's just say, one-to-one personalization. This was such a hot button topic. I remember at IRCE years ago. And so you're leading towards, okay, no best practices and we can optimize towards your individual users. How much do you see this as still being a thing where people are still talking about like one-to-one personalization? Is that kind of like a fad that's been done, or are there still things people are doing to, let's just say like micro segment people?
You cut out there one more time.
No, I apologize. So like, is this a fad for still doing like one-to-one personalization, Or is there still some validity to segmenting, on a very granular level?
If you could figure out how to do it right, absolutely go for it. There's also you get into the issue of diminished returns, but the idea is sound. Get the right message to the right person at the right time, and then get rid of all the other stuff. And so if you could figure out a way where you have an audience signal that you can correctly identify something about that person and then show them the right thing, absolutely. And especially if it's new versus returning visitors. Okay, on your site, maybe you have a recently viewed item section. This is one of I love those recently viewed item sections. However, if you're a new visitor to the site, it is meaningless. It's useless.
Mm-hmm.
And so for new visitors, maybe I just hide that section throughout the site. And for a returning visitor, now they're going to have that recently viewed item section. It becomes useful. That's a simple example, but that's more personalization than most sites do. And so I look at it that way, as can I use, that's probably the easiest, safest way to look at personalization is, can I use it to just hide the irrelevant items from people?
Yeah. So look, are you okay if we look at a couple of examples of this and just kind of talk about what we like or dislike and stuff? The one that I'm thinking of, you and I talked about last week was the Glossier. Shopify just redid the Glossier website. And I'm going to pull up here. I can share my screen. Let's see. Make sure we select the right window. And we should be good now. Let me know if you can see that. Am I sharing the right one here?
So
can you see the Glossier website? Is this the Glossier website here?
I see a tab about leather pants. Why is my butt so sweaty when I wear leather pants? See, that's a question for ChatGPT. It'll talk to you about it.
Yeah, that's embarrassing. Here, let's actually get the right one up here then.
There we go.
Here's the Glossier one then.
All right, so here's a Harley F on Twitter. Says the brand new Glossier site's live and powered by Shopify. And yeah, it's Glossier and Supreme, the streetwear brand, moved to Shopify around the same time. That's an exciting win for them. However,
this got hit though. A lot of people hated this website at the same time. A lot of people loved it. A lot of people hated it. Why?
Isn't that strange? I think if you have a site that's that polarizing, hey, congrats on all the free publicity.
Sure.
I'm sure that their conversion rate just tanked when they launched this site because a whole bunch of unqualified people went to the site. I'm not buying makeup from Glossier. You're probably not buying makeup from Glossier. I bought some powder from Sephora 5 years ago, and I'm still using it occasionally on camera. That's the extent of my
powder in your nose?
purchasing.
I maybe need to do that too. I've got a little shine going on here.
I'm not doing it here, but I'm just, I'm an oily man. And so I'm a 40-year-old with acne. I need my powder. But it's kind of interesting. Everybody within the e-commerce Twitter community, and of course, Twitter thrives on outrageous opinions.
Always.
Had opinions on this Glossier site because there's high standards. This huge brand that there are lines around the block when they open a retail store. And for the president of Shopify to say, hey, let's welcome this brand to our platform with the site that we developed with them. Then suddenly there's very high expectations that this is the best of the best. When the reality is it's perfectly all right to have, to not follow best practices blindly and strictly in favor of, let's have some personality. Let's have some branding, or occasionally let's just try stuff. Let's throw it against the wall and be atypical because we want to see what happens. We're not paying by the pixel. The page doesn't expire or go bad. I can make changes at any time. That is one of the wonderful parts about web development is it's very malleable as a medium. And so it's okay to play around and test. But with Glossier, the criticism, and it looks like they've might have addressed this a little bit.
I'm wondering. It's this looks like this has changed a little bit since the original one went live.
The original one, that main menu it was plain text. It still is. And it was this thin font. It was gray on white. It was small. It was shockingly difficult to read. And it wasn't for like lack of space. It wasn't like they had too many elements.
Right.
It feels like a site that's very mobile first, right? We're looking at it on desktop.
Yeah. And that's part of the problem, right? Like we just called out, sometimes we're evaluating things on desktop, and I'm willing to bet a lot of other people were evaluating this on desktop and not looking at the mobile version of this.
On mobile, it's a little weird too, if I'm honest.
Sure. I mean,
But like,
so
all right,
I
you
haven't
land
seen
on
a
the
shop
site.
now button this far to the left, like just randomly over here. Like that is different, right? Like Glossier, right? Like that's different. It's just, you can't say that it's best practice, but it might work very well for them.
I think sometimes you get, that works too. Like the human brain craves novelty. And so if I could present you with something unexpected, new, and different, I have your attention. The problem is with those novelty is it's a trick, and novelty wears off. And so
Sure.
at some point it just becomes like, oh yeah, that's what it looks like. And it's kind of annoying.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you said that I appreciate the most, though, out of all of this, the biggest takeaway is be aware of the metrics that you're looking at when you analyze whether this is or isn't working, because you called it out perfectly. When you launch a new website, conversion rate for them was down likely significantly, and it had nothing to do necessarily with whether or not the site was good or not. And even if you were looking at, spying on them, like you said, with what was it, Microsoft what?
Clarity. Yeah.
Microsoft Clarity. You still would maybe see like a lot of erratic behavior because it's people like you and me who are not going to buy it, that are just browsing everything. And so it can create a lot of, let's just say, like false realities that you might try to make decisions on that data. And it's not the right data that you need. It's not the users who are supposed to be coming to your website buying. And I think that could lead people towards making bad decisions.
What's funny is a new site launch with an accompanying PR campaign. A hallmark of its success is if traffic goes up and conversion rate goes down, because it means we drove a whole bunch of new eyeballs to the site who'd
Sure.
never seen it before. And then maybe our remarketing kicks in, whether that, and there's so many ways to remarket now with customer identity resolution. They don't have to put in their name, email, or any info. I can identify who they are, and I can automatically mail them a postcard, send them an email. These things work, and they're legit and legal.
Yeah.
And get my ad retargeting going, and then maybe 10 days later they make a purchase as a result. And okay, so there's a longer tail on that. But yeah, we often see that with like a new site launch, especially if we publicize it and promote it. It's like, oh, traffic went up, conversion went down. Oh no, the site launch wasn't successful. Wasn't it though?
Yeah.
It could be. Conversion rate could be misleading because it's so dependent on its denominator.
Yes.
If I change the quality of traffic in any way, that number swings wildly.
Yeah. And I think that's true for a lot of metrics. The metric itself can be very misleading. Returning customer rate is one that I absolutely hate as a metric, because I don't think it tells me anything worthwhile. For example, if all of a sudden you doubled your ad spend and you're driving a ton of new traffic to the website, your returning customer rate, as far as new customers divided by, or new customers compared to returning customers, is wildly different. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you all of a sudden have less returning customers. It just means that, like, weighted compared to the amount of new traffic that you have coming in, it's different. And so you might think that you have a problem with returning customers when you don't. You just have actually done exactly what you need to do, which was increase your top of funnel. That's not a bad thing, but the metric changed.
Yeah, so they have, no, I don't know where I was going with that.
That's all right.
So
I'm going to
fire
open
up a product detail page.
Well, oh, sure. Because I was going to say, otherwise we could jump over to the Crocs one too. I want to talk about that one. Let's see.
Yeah, so I think looking at the site now, I feel like they improved the criticism on the fonts by bumping up the size or the font weight. One of the two, because even in a screen share, like suddenly it's easy to read.
Yeah.
But you've clicked through to a product page. It says the lip color trio. It was not obvious to me where that add to cart button was going to be. The add to cart button's below the fold, along with the price. That's all right. That definitely, it's atypical. It's not best practice. And our product form is on the left. Yeah, that add to bag button is gray on white.
I mean, it's exactly what you said. It's like it's not even black text. I don't think. I think it's like dark gray on light gray on white.
Yeah. So like, if I'm saying let's conversion rate optimize this, my answer would be take that add to cart button. Let's make it way more obvious that it's a button. Buttons should look like buttons. And then move it above the fold. I want that like with that little product description up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Right up here.
Now,
make it simple.
Same deal. Maybe this looks different and better on mobile.
Probably not. But okay, so yeah, but the button is such a silly thing. I can remember there being outrage. I wrote an article on Optimizely years ago, maybe 2014, about even buttons and some of the things that we did, and we did see a 40% increase in conversions just by making some edits to the button, where it was at, the color it was. And I can remember a big thing that people talked about was, at least at this time, the hot thing was button colors need to be yellow. And I think that was because maybe there was something that Neil Patel put out there about like button colors being yellow that had the highest conversion rate. And it's just to make sure that I clarify like what I think, and you can absolutely refute this. I'm not a CRO expert by any means. We focus on the ad side of things, but it's not about yellow. It's not about what color this should be. What I like to see is contrast. I like to see that there's at least something that makes this stand out to your point where it's like, my eyes are at least drawn to realize, oh, there's a button there and that I can click this.
I remember someone telling me, they're like, buttons can't be red because red means stop. And so they subconsciously won't add. And they were convinced of this. They're like, so it has to be green. It's like, all right, sure. Like, what if green's the color of barf? How about that? Green's the color of barf.
Sure.
Therefore, subconsciously, I don't want to click your barf button. Like, if that's the direction we're going here, like, how far do you want to take it? Fortunately, that's a fairly easy thing to test. What's funny is for the number of split tests I've run, I have never once split tested button color. That one just seems so inconsequential.
Sure.
Maybe I should.
Well, yeah. Well, like I said, I don't think that the color itself matters, but I do think that the color compared to the background matters. That's where I'd say like gray on white, light gray on white.
Contrast.
Exactly. It's just contrast. It's just does it stand out enough to where you can see that there is a button there?
Well, and you also have to consider like, people with different visions. Some people are colorblind. Like Mark Zuckerberg famously is colorblind. That's why Facebook uses a lot of blue. That's what he can see.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good call. I'm not colorblind. And so I love color coding everything, Asana tasks and everything. And there are people on my team that are not, or that are colorblind. And so I have to think through that and say, wait a minute, is this going to work for that person as well? I've got the Crocs ad pulled up too, because along the lines of, let's just say best practices, this is not on the website, but it was so interesting and it just fit with the theme of, let's just say, conversions and best practices and what you expect out of a brand. I loved this ad. Have you seen this one? Did you see this go around?
I've seen it because of you.
Okay.
And I love it. I call this style of ad shit posting, right? For lack of a better term, it's shit posting. I love when a brand does it because they thought about it, they thought hard about it, and they approved it, and it went through multiple layers to get to the point in ad spend before you ever saw it. And they went like, this is it. They have selectively designed a like meme type shit posting style ad. And that's why it gets your attention because you don't expect it from a brand, but it is what you expect to see in your feed from friends potentially. Sure. And so you're like, this meme style, but it's really as a brand to do a meme style ad, stakes go up. Like you don't want it to seem, you do it wrong and my Gen Z kids will say it's cringe because you're trying too hard. Like, God forbid it looks like you put effort into anything if you're my 12-year-old.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Including how you dress or anything, right? It's like, it's funny, like some of the things that like my daughter will say that are in style. And it's like, literally the goal I feel like is to look as if you tried not at all, but you really did try, but it looked like you did not try at all.
Look, remember grunge in the early 90s?
Absolutely.
Like that's what I had. That's what I grew up with. And if you look back on that same deal, I'm sure our parents were like, what in the heck is wrong with these kids?
It's coming back. It's coming back actually a little bit. I think I just saw some people starting to wear Jinkos or something. And I was like, oh man, like we're going way back into like style that was cool when I was in like junior high and high school.
Man, Jinkos. You want some jeans that are just really, really big?
I did show my daughter those and she was like, no, please don't let those come back in style.
But
so if you're listening,
ad, that's what makes it work.
Yeah. Well, and if you're listening, I just realized it was like, if you're listening, you have no clue what this ad looks like. So I want to explain it for you real quick here. Crocs did an ad, and it has just like a side profile of the shoe. And then there are every possible bad font that exists on Windows 95 there, with like gradients on the fonts and things like that. And it says, did you know Crocs has sneakers, very sneaky, very soft, mom will approve. I mean, this is the epitome of like, you took this into Canva. You didn't even let Canva's AI do it, which they have some really nice AI lately, but you took it into Canva. You didn't let the AI do it. You just took the basic, cheapest fonts that you could find and threw some colors on it and just said, yep, that looks good. And
Church
I
flyer.
loved it.
That's the style. It looks like a church flyer.
That is.
This should be on a bulletin board at your local community church.
That is absolutely accurate. I loved it. It got so much attention, and I think that it caught my attention. I even like the words that they used, though, where it's like very sneaky, very soft. Mom will approve. It just
it feels
felt
wholesome,
to me,
doesn't it?
It does, and it felt like it brought back nostalgia to me. And so, like, if their target audience is me, it absolutely did a great job, because I remember playing around with every one of these fonts. I don't know if I can tell you what these fonts names are, but I can remember playing with these and all of those colors when I was on, and adding like that drop shadow behind the Crocs there.
You're
like,
playing with like Broider Bund Print Shop Deluxe. Print out your own like Mother's Day cards.
Yes. That is, wow. That's exactly right. That's what it feels like. And so I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is like my childhood.
You're like, oh, basically a graphic designer.
Yeah. So I want to transition a little bit, because there's something else that I wanted to talk to you about that we talked about before, which was empowering mental health. There was something you brought up about cognitive biases. Perception is reality. Reality isn't reality.
Yes. So I think for improved mental health as a human, not just a business owner, but I think with entrepreneurship, the stakes are higher. And so it's easier to get more stressed, and it's like, the buck stops with you and as an entrepreneur. And so you tend to be harder on yourself. You tend to bring in, internalize a lot more work stress, and that could be quite detrimental. And so I think one of the most powerful things I've done is I'm often interrogating my own decision-making. And like, if you're talking to ChatGPT, it's kind of interesting if you tell it, let's think step by step. But you should really do the same thing to yourself. It's like, okay, if there's a thing that's bothering me, let's back up here. Mm-hmm. What led me to think about it this way? And there's a lot of cognitive biases that humans engage in. Like the thought that we are by nature rational just isn't true. Like we're really just, clever mammals trying not to get killed.
The reptilian
That's kind of
brain.
how our brain's set up. Yeah. Like your reptile brain is back there trying to keep you from getting eaten by a snake or something.
Right.
And so if you start thinking through a lot of like cognitive biases and you learn them, you start to recognize them and realize, oh no, a lot of what I thought might have been good decisions or things that were bothering me simply aren't the case. And one of my favorites that I see a lot of people fall victim to is recency bias, where you got like, I had an electrician over, did some work, and then half the outlets in my basement quit working. And I was like, clearly this man broke my outlets. That obviously, based on the time frame, that's what happened here. Sure. And the reality was, my house was built in 1992, and the circuit breaker, when he did the proper thing of turn them off individually before the main breaker, and then turn the main breaker back on, turn them on individually. It's just this one breaker had never been flipped. It was so old that just flipping it on and off was enough to break the thing. That was all that happened. And so that recency bias, though, I was like, oh, this guy broke. It wasn't the case at all. And we see that all the time with websites. Like a bug crops up, and it's like, whatever the last change I made. Oh, well, clearly that must be it. Where you go, change this button color, Kurt. All right, sure. And then the next day, our conversions are down. It must be because we changed the button color. Not necessarily at all. Those things just happen to have occurred within the same time frame. Not that they're necessarily related. Like that's one of my favorite examples. And of course, there's like confirmation bias. We'll just tend to seek out information that agrees with us. I don't want to go Google things that don't agree with me. Who wants to be wrong? I like getting over that, being able to say, hey, maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe I like completely blew this. Or maybe I need to say sorry and apologize. Like being able to identify those cognitive biases just makes it so much easier to go, oh, I got that wrong, but here, we can fix that for the better. And I think that's where it starts, is like, really, just there's a Wikipedia article you go through, here's all cognitive biases, and you start recognizing very quickly, like, the ones that you'll make. It's also fun to recognize it in other people, especially in like how they're dealing with you, or like you'll see it especially in like online arguments, like straw man arguments, where they're going to attack something or set up something else that either they dismantle and go, see, you're like, but okay, great. Now that we've torn that straw man down, let's go back to our original argument here.
Yeah.
But life just becomes much easier when you engage in these things. And like, maybe you learn this stuff in college. I didn't. I had to go back and learn it through Wikipedia as an adult.
That's
like the rest
the
of us.
thing. I wish that it was almost a required course in high school or something to go through, let's just say, logical arguments, right? And
Yes.
all the different types of, like you said, straw man being one of them, but like there's, a lot of different ways in which we are lied to on a daily basis, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, by, let's just even say by ourselves. We lie to ourselves. We are lied to by others, by the media, by the government, by whoever.
By
And this is
authority
not an
figures?
anti-government. Yeah, like
But
this is
it's just the nature of human rhetoric and
Human-
discourse.
exactly.
Yeah,
and I feel like this shows up in data all the time, and this is exactly, I think, to the point that you bring up, where we'll see this in let's say the ad side, where somebody can say, well, our ads aren't performing as well because the CPM is up. Well, that might sound like a good reason for why the ads aren't performing well. But what's interesting is if you go chart the CPM against your, revenue, CPM is positively correlated with revenue. And every time your CPM goes up, your revenue typically goes up. So, well, that's interesting. That didn't chart out the way that you had hoped it did. And so there's a bias that we sometimes have in all of these things. And we, like you said, we seek out the data that tends to tell us what we want to believe. And I think that causes a lot of problems in our analysis. And I actually wrote a couple articles that I think would be good to talk about with this. There's two big ones that I remember putting together. One is about Bayes' theorem and how that shows up in advertising. And so I'll link to that in here as well. The other is about Simpson's paradox in advertising. And both of these kind of come to the idea where you can have these presuppositions about what you expected to see in the data, and the data will actually confirm what you wanted to see unless you look at the underlying variables. And so an example of this is, we'll see this in not just advertising, but let's say like medical results. And so they do a study or something on whether or not a medication was effective. And they could say that it is effective, maybe in general, if they look at just all of the trials. But if you look at like all of the different subsegments of every single person, it actually wasn't effective for every single one of those groups compared to the placebo. But in aggregate, for some reason, the way that the aggregate amount of stuff works out, because it maybe was more heavily weighted towards one group than another group, the aggregate numbers, the averages actually say that it was overall. But each single group, it wasn't. And it's a wild thing. So if you haven't seen Simpson's Paradox, please go read this article and see how this is playing into your e-commerce store, your ads. And to bring it back to the ads, the example there would be maybe there's an ad that you're saying ad A, ad B, and maybe ad B says that it's beating ad A when you look at it just across every campaign. But when you break it down and you look at, well, which one's doing better for prospecting versus retargeting? Maybe it's ad A that's outperforming in both of those groups, but because it was weighted more towards the retargeting, that's why ad B in aggregate ends up looking better across the whole. And it's a very interesting phenomenon.
There's that phenomenon. Issues like that occur in your daily life, whether you realize it or not, constantly. And oftentimes you're doing it to yourself and you have no idea. And until you're aware of it, you can't change it. And
right.
I think that's just it's just a lifelong way of thinking, is learning to question your assumptions about decision making.
Totally. Kurt, I got one more thing that I want to do with you here, because I like to have a little fun. This is an ad lib script so ad libs, not Mad Libs, because it's about advertising. But I need to do that on my I need to do that on the Rodecaster Pro. But so I'm not going to tell you what it's about yet. But I just need you to give me a few words.
Oh, boy.
So we're gonna go with this, and then we're gonna act it out. So this is very like Jimmy Fallon style, where you're gonna be person one, I'm gonna be person two, or vice versa, whatever we want to be here. So I need a name, any name, fun name, make up a name. It could be your name, it could be Harley Finkelstein. I need a name.
I'm going to go for a name. I'm going to go with the Keebler Elf. Does that count? This is a proper name.
Absolutely. That's great. Keebler Elf. Okay. And I need a sound that an animal makes.
Well, moo is the immediate.
No, that's good. Verb you would use in sports. So let's get like a verb that you'd use in sports.
Tackle.
Run. Tackle. Nice. You're good at this. A verb that you would use in a workshop or a machine shop.
Drill.
Okay. A plural noun as a thing. So like a plural thing.
Bottles. Is there a theme?
Nice.
Is there bottles work?
No. Like, I mean, there's a theme to this, but I don't want you to know the theme. I specifically want you to just pick random things. All right. A feeling or an emotion that ends in ing.
Sweating.
That's good. That's interesting. Okay. An idiom, like it's raining cats and dogs, killed two birds with one stone.
The customer's always right.
Nice. Almost done. An animal.
Rabbit.
Nice. Shout out to Aaron Orndorff, the rabbit master. Let's see. I can put that there too. All right. An animal body part, not for a rabbit though. Different animal.
An animal body part.
An animal body part. So, I mean, it could be from a rabbit
We'll
too.
go
Like
tail.
you said,
Let's go
foot. Tail, sure. But I just meant it didn't have to be from a rabbit. Let's see. A verb you would use at work, like email. It's like, I need to email this. Work verb.
DM.
Nice. And then the same animal from before here. And a human body part.
Oh. What are like specifically human body parts?
Knee, ankle. I mean, yeah, it doesn't have to be specifically human body parts, I guess. But it's like, I didn't want you to say like trunk. And it's like, well, that's an elephant.
All right, can I go with hair?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually really funny when I see that. And then a business phrase or call to action.
Add to cart.
That's so good. It's so good. Okay, and then last two. I just need any verb, just a verb. I don't have a theme for it.
Chat.
Okay, and then the last one is just one more verb. Any verb.
Share.
I ran out of categories. What was it?
Share.
Actually, that fits really well. Okay, I'm going to share my screen one more time for you here because we're going to act this out. Pull that up. You should be able to see it. And we're going to go back to the top. Do you want to be person one or person two?
Yeah, I don't know what I'm getting into, so I guess I'll be person one.
Okay, you picked the right one. Okay, so we are writing an email to a client about why their ROAS is down. Okay, so we're going to set the scene here. Your client just sent you this email. Hey, Keebler Elf. I just got an email from a Facebook ads rep, and they said that everything you're doing is the wrong thing. They were 100% convinced that the reason our ROAS is down 3% week over week is because you're targeting new customers instead of just letting Facebook do whatever the heck it wants to do and repeatedly target the same repeat customers that it knows will buy already. You're person one.
Excuse me. I can use the voice changer on this, really dialed up.
No, you're good. Here, let me blow this up a little bit here too. Make it a little bit easier.
Boy, that's a tough email. How are you going to respond?
Nah, who gives a flying moo? What the Facebook rep said. Maybe I'll just ignore the email and go tackle myself.
I don't know. I don't think our boss would like that. Why don't you read to me what you have, and I can help you drill it a little bit. I tend to be really great with bottles.
Naturally. Great idea.
Natural.
Here's what I have so far. Hey, Steve, I can understand how sweating it must feel to get an email from your. Oh, hang on one second. Siri decided that she was going to jump into that conversation.
Thanks, Siri.
I'm sure you didn't get that. Okay. I can understand how sweating it must feel to get an email from your Facebook rep like this. I just want to assure you that everything is the customer's always right. The Facebook rep is wrong here. It's much more likely that the ROAS is down because of a rabbit in your account. The rabbit will often cause ROAS to drop because they use their tail to DM, which the Facebook policy is clearly against. I'm going to dig in tonight and remove the rabbit with my own 2 hairs if I have to. Add to cart, William Harris.
Wow, I can tell you've really chat this through. Sounds good to me. Go ahead and share it.
There we go. We nailed that. I appreciate you entertaining me with your acting skills.
Yeah, I know. I put in the whole ass that for you.
Okay, real quick. I really appreciate the half-ass thing. And like, have you seen, what is his Ismo, I think. Have you seen Ismo? He's a comedian. He talks about half-ass. Okay, so he talks about, he's like from Croatia or something, and he's really funny explaining how he doesn't understand like a lot of like things that Americans say, and like half-ass doesn't make sense to him too. It's like, you got to go watch it, but he's like, half-ass, this is a bad thing. You're, full ass, this is a good thing. Like, I don't understand what's going on. But I always, half-ass, I understood it to be let's just say a misunderstanding of the word haphazardly. You did it haphazardly, and haphazardly just became half-ass. And then somebody was like, oh, did you say half-ass? And it turned into half-ass, which makes absolutely no sense at all, because you can't walk around with one butt cheek, at least not that I'm aware of, very easily.
In English, there's a lot of weird idioms, but, in linguistics, what you've described is called a corruption, where it's like someone mishears a thing, but then it starts getting repeated, and then now that becomes accepted as to like, that's the phrase. So yeah, it could be a language corruption. Like patina is actually should be pronounced patina. It's not French, it's Latin, but we say patina. So it's a corruption.
Interesting. There are a lot of corruptions in life. For those who want to be uncorrupted and follow you and stay in touch and learn from your magical mind, what is the best way for people to reach out and stay in touch with you?
Oh my gosh, Google me. Google Kurt Elster. KurtElster.com is my site. It's got links to everything, but mainly it has my newsletter. And every Tuesday I send out a nice recap with some what I learned that week, called the
Awesome.
Recon newsletter. Yeah, nice.
It is a fantastic newsletter. You should subscribe. If you are in e-commerce at all and you are not subscribed to this, you are missing out. Definitely subscribe to that. Kurt, really excited to have you on here today, sharing with us your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. Hold on. Oh, the crowd loves it. All right, calm down, guys.
And thank you, everybody else, for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.